Bon, les derniers arrivent. Merci beaucoup d'être aussi nombreux ce matin. On avait pour cet événement 520 inscrits. Il a fallu qu'on close d'ailleurs à 500, puis ensuite il y a des nouveaux inscrits qui sont arrivés. Pour ceux qui n'ont pas pu venir, il y a toujours des petits soucis du matin ou des problèmes d'agenda. Il y a comme toujours un replay qui sera disponible sur la chaîne YouTube du groupe Bouygues dans 3 jours. Donc vous pourrez revoir les événements. Donc, nous sommes ravis pour cette 16e matinée d'innovation. Eh oui, Marilus, 16 ans déjà. Non, ce n'est pas 16 ans parce qu'on en fait 3 ou 4 par an. Que nous accueillons donc une matinée d'innovation. Et traditionnellement, nous organisons une séquence pour le MIT. Et donc, c'est le symposium du MIT en France que nous organisons cette année. So, thank you for the MIT, let's say, guys and girls to be with us today. It's amazing that you travel, let's say, to come to Paris to speak about a very, very important subject for us, the digital twin. And of course, digital twin and AI. And before to start with the technical, let's say, assignment of this digital twin, let me introduce to you GAYATHRI. GAYATHRI is the head of the MIT ILP, Industrial Liaison Programme. You know, we are part of this Industrial Liaison Programme since almost 10 years now, and with a great pleasure. And we organize each September an XCOM session in Boston to discover all the latest news from the MIT, and it's always incredible. So, GAYATHRI, it's your turn.
Well, thank you so much, Christophe. There's a clicker. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. First, bonjour. This is my second time in Paris, and I'm enjoying myself, learning about all the wonderful things that are in Paris. In addition to the Eiffel Tower, I discovered Bouygues. But thank you for this opportunity. I did want to introduce myself. I'm GAYATHRI SRINIVASAN. I'm the Executive Director of MIT Corporate Relations. So I did want to talk about innovation at MIT. And when we talk about innovation, we define innovation as the process of taking an idea to impact. Here, we have our nano-architected carbon that can withstand supersonic impacts, basically materials that laugh in the face of physics. We are working on commercial plasma fusion and clean energy because why not solve the energy crisis while we are at it, right? And again, you also see paper-thin solar cells, really thin margins. And then, of course, we have Bob Langer, who is one of our institute professors. And he is like a walking patent factory. And when I say walking patent factory, in his 42 years at MIT, he's created 42 companies and modernized one of them. Then we have Professor Munji Bawendi, who is a Nobel Prize winner for quantum dots. And by the way, all the Netflix binging that you're doing, let's say thanks to the quantum dots that are on your television sets. And of course, we have sent a few people to space because they decided that Earth was not challenging enough. So why not go into space? And then, of course, we have our Nobel laureates from last year in economics. So yeah, we are covering from atoms to astronauts to economic systems, and everything in between. And here is a slide that is showing you some of the companies that have been started by MIT folks. And when I saw this for the first time, I was really surprised. I'm like, really? Campbell's soup? Apparently, your chicken noodle soup has MIT DNA in it. So just letting you know. Next time you have it, you'll remember it. But the point that I'm trying to make is MIT folks don't just start companies, they start industries. This is just some numbers that I'm throwing at you. I don't want to focus on it, but I want you to see 362 patents issued. That's almost one patent a year, right? Except like a few days for vacation. We're allowed that, right? Then we have 593 invention disclosures. That's like over one and a half inventions per day. That's a lot of inventions. And of course, we work with 700 plus companies. And some of you are here who partner with us. So we thank you for engaging with us. With that, I did want to talk to you a little bit about what is MIT focused on these days, right? So we have our president, Sally Kornbluth, who has shared with us some of her ideas of priority areas for MIT to focus on. And you may know that, right? MIT is only focused on tough problems, right? So we are marshaling climate expertise to solve technological, behavioral, and policy solutions. So yeah, we are trying to look at it from all angles, including rocket science. And we do have rocket scientists at MIT, believe it. Then, of course, the Health and Life Science Initiative, where we are thinking about bringing world-class expertise to catalyze discovery, innovation for human health. And Moderna is one of the examples, you know, COVID and all the vaccines that came from, some of them came from Moderna. Human insight is because we are engineers at MIT, but we do also remember that, you know, humans are the ones who are actually using all the technology. So we do need to understand the human insight or the human piece around it. Then, of course, artificial intelligence, everybody's talking about it. Providing leadership for society as it navigates through AI and its implications. We helped invent this field, so we are going to help solve for all the problems and challenges that may come as we are exploring and going about it. Education is another new initiative. The focus on designing curricula for the digital AI age. So looking at it from, you know, bringing 1 billion plus people to AI literacy and bringing more of them to AI fluency and beyond. Manufacturing, defining the future of manufacturing and higher productivity using lower carbon footprint, better jobs, greater resilience, etc. And quantum, everybody is also focused on quantum, applying, amplifying quantum research and driving innovation because at MIT, regular computing is not challenging enough, right? So we have to go to quantum. So what's in the water here? I have articulated 4 of them. First, we put problems before funding. We ask, what do we need to do to make things better? Then we figure out how to pay for it and go about solving it. Second, we encourage risk-taking. In fact, we actually expect failure and celebrate it on the way to success, right? So we don't just tolerate a failure, but we anticipate that. And in a corporate environment, that's very hard and challenging to do. So come to MIT. The third is, of course, we have a well-staffed office. That's my office. And so we are here to help connect MIT to industry and industry to MIT. And of course, the fourth is all the key stakeholders around the MIT ecosystem, which means MIT, the startups, the corporates, the venture capitalists, and then you have government. So it's not just about MIT being in isolation, but it's also being MIT being the catalyst that brings everyone else together. This is the MIT Industry Liaison Program, which Chris just mentioned. The Liaison Program has 200 plus members, and we are thankful to Bouygues, who's one of our member companies. And of course, we work in concert with our Startup Exchange Program, through which we connect MIT to industry around research, innovation, students, and education. I'm not going to go into detail, but one of the efforts that we do is bring people together in such venues, bringing them to you know, events, webinars, as a passive way of learning, and of course connecting you with specific faculty that can help solve your problems. These are the industries we solve, we connect around. This is everything. So I'm just showing you a snapshot of all areas that we engage with. Some of it are larger than others, but MIT is in all industries, and we have member companies in all industries. This is our 200 plus members, where they exist. We have about 28% in North America, 31% East and South Asia, and everywhere else, 21% in Europe. These are some success stories. Lonza, Kyocera, Senai, BHP, they're all member companies that work together with a faculty to solve a specific problem. And these are all startup success stories where we connected a member company with a specific startup that was either scaling or was an acquisition or investment opportunity for them. With that, I did want to leave you with one thing, and whether you remember anything that I said, I just want you to remember one thing, that MIT is not just about producing great research. We do that. It's not about creating startups. We do that as well. But it's about building an ecosystem, a global ecosystem where problems get solved. And with that, I'm going to stop and hand it out to Jiwon.
So thank you, Chris and Gayathri. Bonjour. Pardon my French pronunciation. English is my second language, and Korean is my first language. And I found that French pronunciation is not easy for me, but I will try today, okay? Welcome to the 2025 MIT Paris Symposium. I'm Jae-Won Bae, Director at MIT Office of Corporate Relations. This year's topic is digital twins and AI, redesigning the real world. Today, we will learn about the industry application of digital twins and AI. I'd like to thank Group Bouygues, MIT ILP member Group Bouygues, for hosting this event today. Please make sure your cell phones are on a silent mode today, okay? Today, we will use Pigeonhole live for the Q&A session. If you need a Wi-Fi connection, you can scan this QR code in the upper right-hand side and get the Wi-Fi connection. And Pigeonhole Live is a simple, interactive mobile website where you can submit questions to the speakers. You can even vote on any questions that interest you, okay? Again, you can scan this, the QR code, which is lower left-hand side from you, to get into Pigeonhole Live. Okay? Today's first MIT faculty speaker is NILS FONSTAD. NILS is Academic Research Fellow at MIT Center for Information Systems Research. NILS has been researching how established organizations realize greater strategic value faster from a portfolio of digital innovation initiatives. He's currently based in Madrid, Spain. His most recent research focuses on the value realization model of successful organizations, the system by which they use digital to realize strategy. NILS will talk about doubling down on digital innovation, how exceptional firms use digital to turn uncertainty into growth. Please use Pigeonhole Live during his talk for your questions, and also join me welcoming NILS to the stage.
Good morning, and thank you very much. Bonjour. I wanted to start with a challenge, right? At MIT, we love big problems, and I want to start with a challenge for all of you. Imagine that the head of your organization decides to announces to the public that your organization is going to increase profits by 20% in 5 years using digital technologies such as data and AI. And this is publicly announced. And this effort to increase profits by 20% in 5 years will have a return on investment of 2x. If we increase profits by 20%, let's say that's X. We will invest X to get 2x in benefits, operational reductions in costs, increase in revenue, so that 2x minus X is X, 20% in more profit, right? Let's say it's cash flow. Now, with this challenge, unfortunately, most of the organizations that I study, their top management teams are not up for this challenge. Although most organizations are investing more than ever before in digital technologies, they are not converting those investments into strategic ambitions such as the one that I just described. Ambitions related to increases, say, in profit. Why? Well, for most organizations, their experience with translating investments in digital into impact, i.e. digital innovation, their experiences with digital innovation have not been great. You saw the report from MIT about the large percentage of AI-based initiatives that don't end up in any significant impact. And that is true not just with AI, but with many digital technologies. And as a result, most of the companies that I've talked to, they're afraid of investing their digital technologies into digital innovation initiatives. They're instead, with all this uncertainty, they're instead focused on really maintaining the status quo. And I'm concerned about that, because what I find by studying exceptional organizations, organizations that have succeeded in generating significant bottom line impact from their investments in digital, these organizations actually double down on digital innovation rather than retreat from digital innovation. They commit even more, but what's key is they've also changed their approach to digital innovation. They've stopped some bad habits, habits that have led to wastes of resources, and instead adopted new habits that enable them to generate more impact and less waste. And that's what I want to share with you. Unfortunately, today, we won't have time to go into all the details because I'm going to draw on 10 years of research where I've been looking at what does it take for organizations to thrive with digital. But we just got published in Harvard Business Review, and here's a link to the article. You will have access to all these slides, and so you can download this later if you want. But if you want to learn more, feel free to do that. Also, if you're an ILP member, you have access to our research. And so there's so much that we develop. I am the lead of digital innovation at a center called the Center for Information Systems Research. And we are very grateful to our sponsors and our patrons for enabling us to study in depth with rigor a whole variety of questions related to our central question about what does it take for established organizations to thrive with digital. And all of this research that we do is, again, available for free, and you just have to register, and I encourage you to do that, because today I won't have time to go into depth into all the different aspects that me and my colleagues have been studying. And we have 50 years of research here, so please take advantage that MIT is about sharing and discussing insights with executives like yourselves. This is how we practice mens in manus, which is our motto at MIT. Okay, so let's start with a definition of digital innovation, because if I were to ask all of you, what is digital innovation, I assume that we will have a huge variety of definitions. And as we just heard, this definition builds on MIT's definition of innovation, all right? MIT's definition of innovation focuses on the process of taking an idea from concept to impact. We always anchor our research on impact. I focus on digital innovation, so I look at the process of taking an idea for using digital, especially data and AI these days, from concept to impact. And when I'm talking impact, again, I want to anchor it in the challenge that I provided earlier, which is, let's talk about profit as impact, all right? Bottom line profit. And so I want to emphasize that by digital, we are talking about a range of technologies, and by impact, we can look at a range of impact, including the employee experience, including operational efficiency and effectiveness, increasingly modularity, operational modularity, and how do we make money from existing customers and from new customers, new business models. So it's a wide range of impact that I find companies that are effective at digital innovation. They invest in a wide range of initiatives, pursuing a wide range of impact, all right? Now, unfortunately, most organizations struggle to realize impact. And here, you have a list of exceptional organizations. These are organizations that actually have succeeded despite lots of uncertainty, especially COVID. Despite a lot of uncertainty, they have succeeded in translating their investments in digital into significant impact. And so what did they do? Well, when we study across these last 10 years, when we study exceptional organizations such as these from a variety of different sectors, and we compare them to the majority of organizations that are struggling to realize growth from their investments in digital, when we compare all of them, we identified some wasteful habits and we identified some productive, impactful habits. Those, turns out a lot of organizations we find are wasting resources. And there's three sources of wasteful habits, practices, organizational practices that lead to so much waste. The first set of practices are essentially around investing in solutions rather than investing in solving problems. And for those of you familiar with design thinking, Agile, this is classic, right? This is a classic distinction that a lot of organizations are trying to introduce into the way their employees work, because most of us start with a solution, right? Especially in organizations that have a traditional engineering background. Traditionally, because it worked in the past, traditionally we would plan, very meticulously a solution and then hand it over to someone to build that solution on time, within budget, within scope. Those were the traditional project management metrics. None of those three, within budget, within scope, and on time, none of those have impact on them, right? And instead, we find that that focus on investing in solutions turns out to end up wasting resources, because we end up investing in fondue sets. One executive that I talked to talked about how they traditionally took this approach of investing in solutions, and for them it was like investing in fondue sets. And I'm like, what do you mean by fondue sets? I love fondue, right? He's like, but think about it. When you got married, right, what did you get? And I got a fondue set, right? And many of you, maybe when you got married, got a fondue set for that as a gift from friends who knew that you enjoyed fondue. But let's be realistic. How often do we use that fondue set? And in my case, even though I love fondue, it's gathering dust in the top shelf of my kitchen, right? And this is what happens with way too many initiatives, is we're investing in what intuitively seems like a great idea, but in practice adds little, if any, impact, right? And so we want to avoid wasting resources on fondue sets. The other sources of practices that lead to waste are related to the fact that most organizations confuse the autonomy that digital innovation initiatives need in order to test and learn and adapt as they learn, figuring out what is it that the end users need, what's the problem that we're trying to solve for end users, how can we make the most of our technological capabilities, and how can we take those two and actually bring impact to our strategic priorities. All of that requires autonomy to test and learn. But in most organizations that I've studied, they confuse that autonomy with independence. They say, hey, digital innovation initiatives, we don't want to get in the way. You go off and do your own thing. Yet, digital innovation initiatives, until they scale their innovation, they're not going to realize any impact. And so if we're an organization that depends on, say, 200, 300, 500 digital innovation initiatives in order to realize a strategic ambition, such as we're going to increase profit by 20% in 5 years, until any of those initiatives that we launch scale, they're not going to realize impact. And so, but to scale, every single initiative faces similar challenges. Some of those challenges are operational. We don't have enough data scientists. We need to use data, and that requires a lot of resources to clean up that data, to maintain the algorithms, et cetera. Some of those barriers are strategic. We don't quite have that sufficient business buy-in to really take the initiative from the MVP phase into scale-up phase, for example. And to expect that every initiative face those barriers on its own, we're inadvertently setting them up to fail. And that's the kind of failure that we do not want to tolerate in our organization that is focused on realizing impact. And so in general, the second source of waste is that organizations, in confusing autonomy with independence and simply focusing on independence, they end up not taking a sufficiently holistic and coordinated approach across their initiatives. And so they end up wasting efforts on unnecessary duplication of efforts in the short term, and in the long term, they end up accumulating a lot of unnecessary complexity, what they call spaghetti, regarding digital spaghetti, data spaghetti, spaghetti in the cloud. So the second source of waste is due to the spaghetti, right? So the first, we're trying to avoid fondue sets. The second is we're trying to avoid the spaghetti in the long term. And then the third is when we invest in initiatives that are not of real high priority. They're not bad, they're interesting, they may be the pet project of a top-level decision maker, but at the end of the day, in order to be resilient, we need to be able to ensure that those 10 data scientists that we have are allocated to the 10 digital innovation initiatives most likely to have the greatest impact on our latest strategic priorities. And that ability to prioritize and to stop projects that are no longer really adding enough value compared to the others is the third source of waste. So when we look across these, we basically argue, based on what we've studied, that companies, in order to achieve a strategic ambition such as the one I just described, 20% more in profit in 5 years, they need to stop funding innovation fully based on unrealistic business cases. This is essentially how solutions get built rather than problems solved. And instead, focus at the initiative level on taking a standard test and learn approach where initiatives receive key funding and key resources incrementally based on evidence that what they're doing is on track and is increasing the likelihood of impact. Second, stop giving innovation initiatives more independence. What they want is autonomy, and what they need is some help to coordinate across those initiatives to avoid the unnecessary duplication of efforts. And this is where the investment of shared resources becomes key. And then finally, stop more innovation initiatives. We need to make sure, especially top-level managers in the room, your role is to make sure that the few resources your organization has are allocated to those initiatives most likely to have the greatest impact on your latest strategic priorities. That dynamic resource allocation capability is probably the toughest because it requires increasing the accountability of all of these efforts, but it's essential. So let me give you an example of what that looks like in Repsol. Whoops, let's see if we could advance to the next slide. I seem to have, there we go. Okay, so Repsol, oil and gas, pretty darn boring industry, with all due respect for those of you in oil and gas. This is not your digitally savvy type of industry. This is your old traditional engineering. And 7 years ago, the CEO publicly said, we are going to commit to increasing profits for them, cash flow from operations, by 20% in 5 years through a digital program. So this was 800 million euros in cash flow from operations that they succeeded in achieving. And they did so by launching 505 digital innovation initiatives across 4 very, very different business units. Some of those business units are B2C, so they within that is consumers of energy, gas stations, but then they have oil and gas exploration, so B2B, okay? Despite the very different business units, they took the same approach and they took a holistic and coordinated approach. Not only did they launch 505 digital innovation initiatives, but much more important, they knew from the beginning that for any of those initiatives to contribute to the cash flow target, they would have to scale. And so they redesigned themselves to scale systematically, to scale at scale. They ended up scaling 76% of those initiatives. That's the amazing thing about this story, is how. How did they change their approach to digital innovation so that they systematically became these value realization machines, where over 370 initiatives contributed to the cash flow target. By the way, they are now in the second wave. They're 2.5 years in the second wave with a similar ambition. All right, so they've now repeated this. How? Well, by changing 3 things, as I've mentioned. First, at the initiative level, using design thinking and agile, they appropriated the best of each of these methodologies. They did not pretend to reinvent the wheel, and they said, we're going to take the Repsol approach to realizing value. That involved defining what we're after. So a great, impactful digital innovation is one that represents the intersection of these 3 aspects. It provides value to end users, so we have to be clear about who the end user is and what problem we want to solve. It contributes to the cash flow target, and it's feasible. It makes it operational, especially when it's scaled, the innovation. However, they also understood that the overlap of those 3 aspects is a moving target. All 3 aspects are constantly evolving, especially these days, with all this uncertainty and all these changes occurring. And so the process of developing an innovation that meets all 3 criteria has to be a process of incrementally testing and learning. And that's the other thing that they introduced. They introduced a 5-phase process where, in order for an initiative to get the necessary resources to proceed to the next phase, they would have to prove themselves to an external group, what they called shark tanks, in order to then get the resources necessary. So they changed the initiative level. Second, and just as important, especially important, they invested in several hubs, 8 different hubs of shared resources. Now, those of you in IT, especially in enterprise architecture, you know that for over 40 years, we have talked about the importance of shared resources. What's different here? Well, what I find is that companies like Repsol, the way that they develop these shared resources is exactly like how they develop the initiatives. They focus on 2 end users. The end user, first and foremost, that's most important, is the initiatives. We're trying to help initiatives overcome barriers, common barriers, so that more initiatives are likely to succeed. Together, we are stronger, okay? And so the heads of these initiatives are co-leading the initiatives, so they have a stake in the game, and they're learning across the initiatives to identify common problems and figure out reusable solutions that can be shared across the initiatives and help them overcome the barriers to scaling and thus realize impact. That's the key difference that I see is now we're anchoring the efforts of the shared resources on the needs of the end users, i.e. on the needs of the initiatives. And for the initiatives to succeed, they need to scale. Finally, the third component is a value-based portfolio management and particularly dynamic resource allocation. And now I'm going to switch examples, so I'm going to move away from Repsol and over to the financial services, which is BBVA, all right? BBVA is a financial services company, and they have a portfolio, so it's financial services. Everything they do is related to their strategic objectives, all right? They have 6 strategic pillars that translate into 20 value streams, that translate into 90 programs, that translate into 2,200 initiatives. But they don't have enough people. They don't have enough people. So every quarter, they make sure that the people they have are allocated to the initiatives most likely to have the greatest impact on the latest strategic priorities. As I mentioned, here are the pillars, all right? Here are the 6 strategic pillars. Those don't change every quarter. But what does change are the weights that they put on those pillars. Because some new opportunity or threat, especially thanks to my dear president in the US, creating new opportunities and threats every darn day, right? And so they have to change the weights on these pillars more often than not. So what happens is every quarter, the top management team redefines what their strategic priorities are. Again, they're changing the weights on the key things that they've committed to investors in the long term. They then take the information from the initiatives and they re-rank the initiatives based on type of impact, size of impact, and likelihood of impact. And then they allocate people to those initiatives. Not money, but people. By the end of this process, about 10% of the initiatives have been stopped. The rest have all the people they need and they focus on execution. And as a result, they are the leaders in Europe for cost income. Cost income in the financial services is the equivalent to cash flow. It's a profit metric that a lot of investors look at. And in the case of BBVA, they have been the pioneers and leaders of cost income ratio thanks to this dynamic resource allocation process. So to wrap up, and Cemex does the same, so cement, boring cement, right? They now earn a significant portion of their revenue through digital services, through an app called Cemex Go that now offers their customers a much broader solution beyond simply providing them with the cement that they need. And it took them around 7 years to develop that. They now rely very heavily on data and AI, and we have a great case study that my colleague Barb Wixom designed on how they develop these capabilities. But the key is they also need to prioritize. They don't have enough talent, and so they need to make sure that the talent they have is allocated to those initiatives most likely to have the greatest impact on the latest strategic priorities. That's resilience. That's organizational resilience. So wrapping this up then, there are 3 components that I find are essential for realizing more impact and wasting fewer resources. It's the initiatives that are taking a test and learn approach in a standard incremental way. It's the shared resources and the dynamic resource allocation, the portfolio management. To take a more holistic and coordinated approach to digital innovation means the shared resources and the dynamic resource allocation piece. Simply the initiatives alone is a recipe for failure, and that's what I want to help you avoid. So finally, going back to the challenge, is your organization ready to double down on digital innovation? Is it ready to increase profits by 20% in 5 years leveraging digital. I would argue you are ready, but you probably have to change your approach to digital innovation. Thank you.
Right on time. Thank you, Nils. So, Juan, can you show the questions? Okay. From the Pigeonhole Live. So, thank you for submitting many questions. I think we have many questions to go over. So, the first one is, what are the implications of your findings on the design of organizations? Organizations that increasingly use AI to do tasks that today are done by people.
Yes, so let's go back to, say, Repsol, okay? Just to give an example that is not financial services where everything is related to digital. Even in the case of a company like Repsol that is relying in their first wave on 500 initiatives, those initiatives are co-led by someone from digital and who's responsible for and held accountable for operational excellence at scale, and someone from one of the business units who is responsible for helping the target end user group and, most important, contributing to the cash flow target. They don't know how to do this, right? They don't know, but they have a process of testing and learning. Those of you who have been following research from MIT regarding the use of AI and skills, you will see that they have identified using precise data regarding the tasks that make up normal jobs, right? So all of us have a job. That job consists of many tasks, let's say 10. Some of those tasks are better candidates for being replaced with AI than others. Which tasks are the best candidates, and then which tasks should make up our jobs? The companies that are finding impact through AI are empowering their employees to be problem solvers. And the problem, part of the problems that they're solving are two. Which tasks of your jobs can be replaced with AI, and which ones then should make up your job? That empowerment is not simply, we find in our research, is not simply about giving them the tools, that's important, the shared resources, but just as important, giving them the processes, the skills, and the autonomy to test and learn. So in answer to that question, we find, in complement to the other research from MIT, that we need to set ourselves up to test and learn at the initiative level, at the shared resource level, and at the portfolio level. I find that as leaders, a key responsibility to succeeding and realizing more impact and wasting fewer resources is making it safe to learn. Not making it safe to fail, but making it safe to learn. And that requires that you let your team say, I don't know. However, I think the best way forward is doing this, and then we can learn whether that was correct or not.
Okay. Maybe I go to the second question here. What would be the example of digital initiative that a company like Bouygues, construction and telecom could develop?
Yeah, so there is again, what I like about a profit target, right? So let's say it's cash flow. Let's increase Bouygues' cash flow by 20% in 5 years. Well, there's many different ways to do that. So part of the one area of research that I've looked at is the portfolio of initiatives, and as I mentioned, based on intended impact. And I find that there's 4 kinds of intended impact. Two of those 4 are internally focused, where the end users are employees. And those 2 include operational improvements, and again, that's reduction in operational costs, that is increase in operational efficiency, and often related is increasing how we operate, the modularity of how we operate, all right? But the second one is related to the employee experience, empowering employees to engage in these test and learn processes using data, using these new tools so that they learn for you what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Those are the 2 internal. The 2 external are, how do we make money? from existing customers, so how do we increase revenue per profit or service, and how do we increase revenue per existing customer, right? And finally, new business models. So Bouygues has a huge range of options, and this is where hackathons, when they're very focused, can help generate ideas. I doubt that here the challenge is a lack of ideas. I suspect actually that the challenge is the prioritization, the allocation, and the accountability.
Okay.
Because that's normally what's challenging in most organizations.
I think for the sake of time, we can go over just one more question, but
Sure.
there are a bunch of other questions.
Yeah,
so,
and happy to go through them later.
So we are going to have a coffee break
yeah.
today, so feel free to come to NILS during the coffee break
I
and
accept
then
champagne
discussion.
also. Yeah.
Okay. So NILS work for champagne. What is the most challenging problem a CEO has given to you to solve?
I think it's the well, two things. The ambition, right? How many of you work in organizations where the CEO has said, yes, we can, and so we're going to publicly set this ambition? Second, it requires working across silos, okay? At Repsol, at BBVA, the traditional leaders, they defined power based on how many employees reported to them. Now, power is based on what kind of impact have you realized. You need a pretty strong CEO to change that culture, right? Because suddenly at BBVA, your employees are not your employees. They're BBVA's employees. They're Repsol's employees. And we're going to reallocate them to those initiatives that earned those employees, not because of some CXO who's, good friends with the CEO. So that kind of decision-making has got to change, and that's on the CEO to do that. So finally, it's the dynamic resource allocation, it's the accountability, it's the transparency. And that's where the CEOs have to get a lot tougher.
Okay. Thank you, NILS.